Well, hello, my inky friends. It's Cindy Lynn with my inky fingers. Thank you so much for joining me today on my YouTube channel and blog. If you're new here, welcome. Today, I pulled the plug. I got my Gemini yesterday, my Gemini Jr. So today, I want to give you my real honest thoughts and opinions. All I've done is unbox it, and it came beautifully packaged. I got it from Amazon, and the reason I bought it from Amazon, just an FYI, if I can get a good deal on Amazon, I'm going to buy it there because if something's wrong, they pay to ship it back. I don't have to pay the shipping to ship it wherever it came from, so I do like that about Amazon. However, I'm going to open all of these little things up. I'm going to do a few test runs, and then I'm going to show you something really cool. Now, this is the very first time I've actually plugged it in. I wanted to do this last night, but I wasn't up for recording, so I wanted to make sure that I did everything exactly real time like I experienced it for the first time. I want to preface this too, the plugging in of it, with the fact that I did post about this on my Facebook group, My Inky Fingers, and I asked everybody in the group what their thoughts and opinions were. And one of the biggest negative comments I got about the Gemini Jr. was that it's noisy. So we're going to figure that out today. It comes with the manual for your machine, and it also includes in here your user guide and all that kind of information. And I do encourage you to read it. I won't bore you by reading all of that out today, but it has all of your sandwich guides in here. So I'm going to go through these 3 sandwich guides and see what the results are, and I'm going to compare them to the exact same thing cut out on my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine, aka Big Boss. And then I did say I've got something really cool to show you, so you're definitely going to want to hang around for that. So we are comparing apples to apples. I'm going to use the actual die that came in the Gemini. I'm going to use it in the Gemini, and I'm going to also use it on my Stampin' Up! Cutting machine. And then I will use a Stampin' Up! Die in the Stampin' Up! Machine and also in the Gemini, and I will compare the two of them. Now, just doing this regularly, the very first one for thin metal dies says to use a clear cutting plate, a plastic shim, and all of these are marked, and every single thing you're going to see today came in the bundle. And I got to tell you, on Amazon, this thing is marked down incredibly. I can't link it for you, but in your prospective countries, check on Amazon, because I know in Canada, it was $100 less than it normally is. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. The next thing I want to do is my magnetic shim, which is this one. Ignore the colors on your instruction manual because it shows the magnetic shim as being brown. This is your magnetic shim. And then it wants my die, which my die goes face up, and as you can see, it actually sticks like a magnet on there. My material to be cut, and let me just straighten this up a little bit here, and I'll put my material to be cut there. And then I'm going to top off the sandwich with a clear cutting plate. So I'm turning this on for the very first time, and I don't know how to tell if it's on or not. On the back, there is an on and off button. So I was thinking, oh no, I've already experienced a problem. So there, we're going to turn it on the back, turn the button on. All of the purple buttons light up. The instructions say to insert your sandwich into the mouth of the machine, and the machine will automatically grab it. Now, if you're having a problem, you can press pause, and that will pause wherever it is in its cutting process, and then you can press play to resume it, or you can go backwards to bring your die, or excuse me, your sandwich back out. So I'm going to do exactly what it said, and I'm just going to enter this in. We're going to be very quiet and listen to the sound of this. Okay, so that was the sound. I will say it is louder than I expected. Not as loud as a paper shredder. So if you have a paper shredder in your home, then I don't think it's as loud as that. But if this is going to work, that is a sound I can handle. I have no toddlers or anyone sleeping when I'm crafting, and I highly doubt that where my craft studio is placed in my home, even if there was anyone sleeping, I highly doubt they would hear it. So first impressions, obviously I've got a really good cut because I already have my little innards already busting or sticking to the plate here. And I'm just going to lift up my gray, and that cut beautifully. And as a matter of fact, every single little inside piece is out. None of them are on my actual cut piece. Most of them are here in my actual die. Now, if you don't have a take your pick, I don't use the pick end of it, but I do use this end quite a bit because I can rub this right across here. And you're not just bound to the Stampin' Up! Brand. There are many brands out there that carry the exact same tool, but I will link this tool for you. So that all of that quite easily came out. So I'm very impressed with that. Now I'll take this die and I will run it through my actual Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. Now, to be fair, all I did was run it through my machine one time because I only ran it through the Gemini Jr. one time. So I'm going to lift off my top plate. I'm going to lift up my die because in the Stampin' Cut and Emboss, the die goes down. So I'm going to lift up the die, which it left quite a few bits and bobs inside here. That's okay. I was anticipating that. That's normally what happens when I'm cutting with my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. And that doesn't bother me in the least. I will say I am rather impressed that I now don't have to take my paper with the Gemini Jr. and poke out all of these pieces. There is a time factor there, so the amount of time it took me to put that through the Gemini Jr., pull it out, and then have my finished piece is obviously going to be a lot quicker than it is with my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. Okay, so now I can see that my paper is a little bit warped here, but that could be due in part to the fact that I did rub it with my tool to get those bits and bobs out. But I'm going to tell you that in all honesty, I'm going to put these on the metal plate so you can see, but in all honesty, I mean, both of them cut just as nicely. The Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine, again, left a lot of the bits and bobs inside, which I expected it to do. The Gemini Jr. did not. So when it comes to time, I'm going to give that to the Gemini Jr. When I'm going to come to effort, I will give that to the Gemini Jr. as well because it was very little effort. It just went through and everything came out beautifully for me. All right, for the next comparison, I'm going to use a Stampin' Up! Die, and these dies will be linked down below in case you're curious as to what they are. My paper is a little bit smaller than it should be, so I'm just going to put a little piece of tape there. And I will put my clear plate on the top so the sandwich is the exact same as the first step. And I will enter this into the machine. Okay, so taking that lid off, again, there's many pieces here which are pretty easy to just wipe off into your little trash container. And then I will lift up my paper and then my die. And of course this one, the paper didn't pull the die off. So this is a really good example because I am going to go through with my little brush tool just to release my die. And my die has 0 pieces. There isn't one actual little inside piece that I need to remove from there. So that makes me happy. Now I will take my very well-loved plates, Stampin' Up! Plates, put my die on there, put the lid on, and I will run this through that machine. Okay, I've just run that through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. I will let's pull the paper off like we did with the other one, just because it's a little bit more difficult because it's shifted on me, but that's gone. And now here I have relatively the same amount of bits and bobs on my actual plate. Now, because my plate is so well loved, they actually kind of want to grab and stick to the plate, so I've got to kind of use my fingernail or a Cricut tool to scrape those off. And as I did with the Gemini Jr. die, well, it's the Stampin' Up! Die that I put through the Gemini Jr., I will also have to run my brush tool across the back of the die to release the die. And I do have quite a few bits and bobs in here. This is something that I'm used to. It's very typical for my dies to do this with any manual die cutting machine. I have not experienced not having any bits and bobs, these little insides in my dies. I've never experienced not having any ever before. So I'm very, very impressed that the Gemini Jr. tends to, from what I can see so far with these two dies, take out all of the pieces. So I really like that. Yeah, I'm kind of struggling. Some of them are kind of stuck there. It didn't get, you know, the perfect die cut impression. So if you use a manual machine, you're going to know exactly what I mean. So now that one's done. And there's no difference in the die when it's done. It's just the amount of time. And I'm doing this real time. So this Gemini Jr., when I cut it in the Gemini Jr., it did seem a lot quicker to me. So I am favoring the Gemini Jr. for the dies at this point in time. Now there are some instructions for cutting very intricate dies in the Gemini Jr. manual. I don't personally own any very intricate dies, so unfortunately I will not be able to demonstrate that for you today. However, from what I've learned, there really is no difference in the sandwich. I've watched a Jennifer McGuire video and she does a sandwich for both intricate and regular dies. I will link to that video because I have something else that I really want to show you that I think you'll be really impressed with. Now let's talk about embossing. There is multiple different embossing sandwiches. The first one I'm going to show you is a 2D folder. A 2D folder you'll be able to tell in your stash because it is much smaller than a 3D folder width-wise. So the 2D is very, very thin and the 3Ds are much bigger. If you're unsure, then try it with a 3D first. And if that doesn't work, then downgrade your sandwich to the 2D. So because the Gemini Jr. included a 3D, I will use a Stampin' Up! Pretty Flowers 2D embossing folder, which I will link below for you. And the sandwich for this is a clear plate, your 2D folder with the paper inside, and then a clear plate. So I will just enter this into the machine. And there is my impression there. I notice I've got a really good impression all here. Down here, I don't seem to have a very good impression down here on the actual piece of paper. And just judging by where I put it, I should have got an impression of a flower there. However, I will run this through my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine and see what the results are. Okay, the Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine gave me a much deeper impression than I got on the Gemini Jr. So I'm thinking that it may need an actual extra shim in there, which I will try now. I will use a magnetic shim, and then I will put my folder, and then I will use one more clear plate, and I will put that in the machine. That sounded like it went through relatively effortlessly. And now I have a much better impression on there. And I would call that, I wouldn't notice the difference from the Stampin' Up! One to the Gemini Jr. now. So for the 2D folders, I would use a clear plate, the metal shim, your folder, and then another clear plate on top. The Gemini Jr. came with a 3D folder. Now, first things first, I don't like this folder because my standard 4 1/4 by 5.5 piece of cardstock is too big for this. So that is going to dramatically change by about a 1/2 inch how much smaller your card front has to be. But I will use it for this demonstration and example for you. Now for the 3D folder, you're going to use a clear plate, the magnetic shim, your embossing folder, and a clear plastic shim or plate, however you would like to call it. And that stopped. So I will back it up and I will double check my sandwich. And it says clear cutting plate, magnetic shim, 3D embossing folder, and plastic shim. Oops. And this here is the plastic shim, and you see how easy it is to make a mistake. So we'll try that again. But I'm glad I made that mistake because now one of the things that had concerned me was what happens if something gets stuck? Well, that just showed me that the machine will actually stop, and I could very easily hit the rewind, whatever you want to call that button, and it will then reverse. And that's actually probably what the name of the button is, reverse. It'll reverse that sandwich out and nothing got stuck. So I'm kind of glad I made that mistake. Now that embossed really, really well. Now my paper did crack along the outsides, so that would be an indication to me that I do not want my paper to stick out the sides. So if you have any Gemini or Crafter's Companion embossing folders, I would advise that you cut your cardstock to fit within the actual dimensions of the die cutting folder so that it doesn't crack your paper. I will take this same I will take this same folder and now cut it in my Stampin' Up! Cut and Emboss. To be fair, I left the paper stick out the sides. I used the exact same sheet of paper, exact same size of paper, and in all honesty, I've kind of sensed that the Gemini has a bit deeper of an impression. Just my personal opinion. The paper did tear and crack on the sides, which obviously we expected it to do that. And you probably can't tell on camera, but I feel like the shadows created here in this area are greater than the shadows here in this area, which indicates to me that it did get a deeper impression here with the 3D embossing folder, even in these areas, as opposed to these areas in person. I can definitely see that this one embossed a little deeper. Not that this one isn't a great impression. And if you use a Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine and you've never used an electronic cutter, you would never know the difference. I would have never known the difference because I wouldn't have had the machine. Now I'm going to use a 3D Stampin' Up! Embossing folder because chances are you have a Stampin' Up! Embossing folder or another brand of an embossing folder. So let's see how this performs. So I've got my clear plate, my magnetic shim, my embossing folder with the paper inside of it, and a plastic shim, not a clear cutting plate. And I'm going to insert that. And that is the impression that the Gemini Jr. gave to that 3D embossing folder. I will now cut that on the Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. Okay, I've cut that, or excuse me, I think I said I will cut that. How about I will emboss that? So here, I'm not noticing any difference whatsoever. This is the Gemini Jr., this is the Stampin' Up! Machine. And on this particular one, I'm just not like maybe the tiniest little bit in the shadowing here on this branch compared to the shadowing here on this branch, a little bit in there, not as dramatic as the first embossing folder. I see a little bit more dimension here in the shell than I see on the shell here, but in all honesty, I would not be dissatisfied if this was the only impression I ever got for the rest of time. I have no issue with that whatsoever. Okay, now the exciting thing, or for me it's an exciting thing anyhow, that I wanted to show you was one of the things us crafters, scrapbookers, and stampers all can agree on is we hate it when our plates bow. Now, I know there are a variety of ways, and I can almost hear you all and read all of your comments right now coming through, but Jennifer McGuire has come up with a DIY sandwich, a use at your own risk. She broke the rules and she created a sandwich. So what I want to do is recreate that sandwich here for you today. I will link to her video. The woman is brilliant, and I think that you should go and watch her video as well, because she has tested this particular sandwich for a very long time and has had a lot of success with it. So I personally am going to trust exactly what she says, and I'm going to do exactly what she does. So on my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer, I'm going to cut off approximately 1/4 inch around each side of my magnetic shim. And that almost equates basically to cutting it right along this gray line all the way around the outside. So I'm going to try to get that as close to the gray line as possible and cut it all the way around. And I wasn't 100% straight there, but I'm not too worried about that because The idea here and why she cuts it is because your magnetic shim is going to expand over time. And you'll see in her video, after some time, she has taken her DIY sandwich and actually cut the magnetic shim yet again to reduce the size of it. So mine has a little more than 1/4 inch all the way around it, but she simply just takes packing tape, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. Just take your packing tape, make sure that it's nice and secure on there. And you're going to want to repeat this on all 4 sides of your actual clear plate. So I'm overlapping the tape approximately 1/4 inch into the actual magnetic shim on each side. And there's the last one there. So now that is very safely secured there. The next step that Jennifer did was she put the plastic shim on top of the DIY plate she's already created, leaving the magnetic shim in between the clear plate and the plastic shim. She will then tape all of those together, which I am also going to do. And mine is a little tricky right now because even just with that 1 or 2 passes I did with this plastic shim, it's already not sitting flat and bowing. So I can see why she would be taping these down. And again, from what I've read and what I've heard, this is 100% the way to do this. So I have all the confidence in the world that this is going to be no problemo. So now we take our clear cutting plate, we take our paper like we would do with our manual machines, and we put the die facing down. So the cutting part of the die is now facing the clear plastic plate. The DIY shim upside down so that your plastic shim is on top of your die. We'll bring our machine back in. Okay, so now let's see how that performs. My paper comes off extremely easily, and there's not one little bit inside my paper, as there was not the first time. So I see no difference in that sandwich combination. I'll then take my brush and I will brush those out of my die. Now let's do the exact same thing again with a Stampin' Up! Die. So I've got my clear plastic plate, I've got my paper, I've got my die, and the DIY Jennifer McGuire sandwich, which I will put with the clear plate up, the plastic shim facing down, and I will put this into the machine. Just gonna lift the die right up, and this, just like the Stampin' Up! Machine, I see that all of my bits and bobs are inside of my die. So let's rub out as many pieces as we can. I'm going to make sure that I'm rubbing my brush over every area of my actual die. Pop that out, and I'm pretty impressed. I mean, I've got one little piece there, I've got one little bit stuck in there, but that was pretty impressive, let me tell you. Now I can almost read your mind, and I know the next question coming up is, how do these plates compare to the industry plates? More importantly, how do they compare to the Stampin' Up! Plates? So I'm going to put this on its side, and I'm going to bring in a brand new Stampin' Up! Plate. And I have put these together, and I can see that, number one, the Stampin' Up! Plate is thinner. This is much thicker. And one thing that the Gemini does not have is the tapered edge. Personally, I like the tapered edge on my Stampin' Up! Plates. I won't be able to use my Stampin' Up! Plates in the Gemini unless I was able to come up with some kind of sandwich combination that works. But why would I? The sandwich combination I have right now works fine, so if it isn't broke, don't fix it. But if you happen to not like that beveled edge, or, you know, I'm not even sure what they call it. It just kind of tapers off there. Then you may be happy to know that the Gemini doesn't have that. My old Big Shot plates they are thicker than the Stampin' Up! Plate, but they do not appear as thick as the Gemini plate. So even this one that I bought off Amazon is just a purple sparkly one. It compares more to a Cuttlebug plate, but I would honestly have to say, in my professional opinion, that all of the industry plates currently will not work on the sandwiches I showed you today. However, that doesn't mean that using a metal shim or an extra piece of the plastic shim may not work for your combinations. You would have to do that at your own risk because, of course, anything that you put in this machine that is not made by Crafter's Companion could potentially void your warranty. Now, one of the last things I'm going to address, which was the first thing that came to my mind when I was watching Jennifer put together her DIY sandwich, which I absolutely love, by the way. But one of the things that came to mind for me was, what if I have this sandwich already put together and then I want to use this for embossing? Because this sandwich for the 3D folders, which is what I primarily use, calls for the clear plate, the magnetic shim, and the plastic shim. So all of those are right here at this time, right? So we've got our clear plate, our magnetic shim, and our plastic plate. I am not sure if this will work. I've got a metal shim. I could potentially run this through with the metal shim. I'm thinking it's going to jam, but let's try it. I have zero idea where that embossing folder went, and if you watch my channel, you know things are usually in front of my face and I lose them. I don't know where they are, and that has just occurred. So I've got a new 3D Stampin' Up! Embossing folder. I'm going to put a metal shim on here, and I am anticipating that this will not go through. It's going through. I had fully expected for this to not go through, and it's looking like I probably should not have done that because now my metal shim is completely bent, but I could probably run it through the other way at some point. And I did bend my 3D folder, so the embossing in it is fantastic. But what I'll do, and this here, if this ever happens to you, don't stress. You can put this in a pan of boiling water, and you can put another pot on top of it and let it just kind of sit in there, not on the stove. Boil your water. Actually, as a matter of fact, if you were to watch Jennifer McGuire's video on how to flatten your cutting plates, you could do the same thing with this. I've heard people say put things like this in the oven. I would not suggest that myself. I'm afraid of that idea, but I'm not worried that this is now curled because I can flatten that out again, no problem. I'm going to try to run this through one more time with just a plain piece of paper and no shim whatsoever, which probably wouldn't be the best idea. I would say to prevent the curling, I'm going to put the actual embossing folder on the bottom, and I'm going to make sure it is level with the actual DIY plate. So that seemed to be rather successful. And of course, it's already curled from the first time, right? I don't think that that got as good of an impression as the first time. Perhaps it did, but it's off to the side a little, so it could be an optical illusion. But what I'm going to do to combat having this issue is I will pick up another magnetic mat and a plastic shim because I have a clear mat right here, and that's the combination for embossing. So in closing, I'm going to say that the Gemini Jr. is going to have a forever home in the Inky Studio. I will probably get out my Cricut and think of some fun things to put on here. I can almost see some little eyeballs here right now, but I do like it. I think it's going to save me a lot of pain with my new recent condition for die cutting. I'm excited about that. I will say, yes, it is noisy, but I think it cuts beautifully. I love that I don't have as many bits and bobs. If I'm only die cutting one thing, I can just clean that later. I can clean all the bits and bobs out of the die later and I can just move on with my project. The embossing will be a little tricky. You do have to buy extra folders, but overall, I'm very, very impressed with the machine. And I do want to also mention that I paid for this machine. I am not affiliated in any way with Crafters Companion. I'm not being compensated in any way. They did not ask me to do this review. I purchased this for my own personal use, and this is my own personal review and honest opinion. So hopefully you got some good information today. Tell me what your Gemini Jr. tips and tricks are, and how you feel about an electronic machine versus a manual machine. Let me know down in the comments below, and until I see you guys again, take care and happy stamping!